approaching 10 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. So if you'd like to take your seats, gentlemen, and we will begin the meeting. We'll have just one meeting, if that's okay. Everyone. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Pensions Fund Committee meeting on the 15th of September. We have a number of people online. Have we had any apologies? Apologies?
Yes, Chair. Apology from Councillor David Fothergill.
Okay. Is anybody aware of any other apologies?
Sarah Williams is
online rather than in the right. That's okay. And do we have any other people online?
Hello. Hello.
Caroline Burton.
That's Caroline.
Morning, Caroline. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. I'm having problems again with the sound on Teams, so I'm going to just be joining by phone.
Noted.
Thank you, Caroline, but we'll can hear you at the moment, so long may that continue.
Right.
Okay. Any other officers or
Alexander Thompson is from Peninsula Pensions.
Right.
And so he's doing their bit this morning.
Welcome, Alexander. Okay. Right. Please note that this, we have people online, as just explained. This meeting will be recorded and will be available to view online at the early part of next week, I think, by the time it's done. Is that right, Steve? Yeah. Yes. Okay. The agenda pack for this meeting is available on the ModGov app or directly from the council website via the link which was sent out last week. As agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Declarations of interest. Now, because we are a new committee, I would like us to start off by making sure everybody's declarations are up together. I'll start from the chair. The only organisation I'm a member of that appertains to this is Somerset Council. I'm going to go around the table working this way. John? Oh, I'm on DSFRA as well. Likewise. Thank you. Rob? Likewise. Okay. Thank you.
Somerset Council.
Just. Okay.
Can I also check, as part of this committee, can anyone who is in receipt or part of the pension fund or who's a family member should declare as such as well?
Okay.
Yeah.
I need to declare from the chair that my wife works for a local school and is therefore a member of the LGPS.
I'm a member of the LGPS, Sarah.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin, my wife is also a teacher.
Okay. Michael, can you use your microphone, please? Use your microphone.
Is that on? Yeah. Yes, I've got a pension with Bath and North East Somerset, which is one of the 10. Does that qualify or?
Borderline, but it's better to say than not.
Okay, thanks.
That's right. And I'm in LGPS with Wiltshire.
Right, moving on. The minutes from the previous meeting on the 16th of June, which are pages 9 to 14 of your pack. Is it your wish that I sign them as a true record of that meeting? So proposed. Thank you, John. Seconded by Habib and voted by all of us, I think. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. That's duly done. Thank you. Okay. Public question time. I'm not aware of any public questions been submitted. Nope, nobody's telling me otherwise. Okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item 5, which is the Independent Investment Advisors Report, and I'm going to ask Caroline Burton if you would be kind enough to provide us with a verbal update, Caroline.
Yes, I hope my note got to everybody. There was a bit of delay in it getting out, apparently. And I've just raised there the things that I think that I would be worried about if I was an investment manager at the moment. Of course, we don't know, and neither, for that matter, does Brunel know what the actual managers who are making day-to-day investment decisions are thinking about. But I think these are the main things that people ought to be concerned with. What is going on in China, which really does look a mess, and whether earnings are going to hold up to continue to support the equity markets. I think my sort of core view would be that we probably are going to muddle along, that the US will hold up better than other economies, that we will see something in Europe, and I would include the UK in that if I may, drifting around somewhere just above or just below a recession level, but I wouldn't be looking for anything tremendously deep. And therefore, I think my thought about what I would do if I were an investment manager would be to say, let's just not try and do anything dramatic. Let's just take things steady as they go, see what happens, concentrate on individual securities and making sure we've got the right ones there. So that's my general thought, and I'm obviously happy to take any questions on that or on any other investment matter anyone would like to throw at me.
Okay, members. John, you're first to catch my eye.
Yeah, it's just a general question on with the US election coming along. When do you think, if you think the Fed will turn and switch on the liquidity, start printing money, ringing the cowbell or whatever phrase they use now?
I don't think it'll be this year. There are some signs that the US economy is cooling off a bit. But the last thing I think any central bank wants to do is to turn too quickly and start pumping money into the economy and start getting the inflationary pressures up. So that is one of the reasons why I say I think a sort of steady as you go approach is probably right, because I think they are going to be very wary about cutting rates. And I don't think the Fed is influenced by the election very much, frankly.
Yeah, and the other question was, do you hold any sort of weight to the coming of the BICS challenge to the US reserve currency?
I have spent my entire career being told how there's going to be this huge challenge to the US dollar, and it doesn't happen. Yeah, the alternatives are just not big enough.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Coming away from US and to European Central Bank, yesterday they raised the interest rate by 0.25%. Obviously, raising food prices and energy prices has rippling effects. Undoubtedly, the impact will be huge on our own sort of banks and potentially we will see another 0.25% or thereabouts in our area, curtailing investment. Now, to contain the inflation, how does these factors actually affect our pension investments?
They affect the pension investments if profitability starts to be a real issue at the corporate level. If companies cannot pass on the costs they're incurring or cannot find ways to improve productivity or make investment which sorts that problem out, and corporate profits start to drop, then you will start to see weaker equity markets. Bond markets will probably do very little in that context.
So basically, it's unclear as yet.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's clear that that the bank is going to, in the UK, the bank is going to go on trying to resist inflationary pressures, and that will keep things, I think, fairly flat. I mean, I wouldn't be worried, as I said, about a big downward move in markets, but I think to look for a big upward movement would be rather optimistic.
Colleagues, any other questions for Caroline? I'm not seeing any. Okay. Oh, Michael.
Just a bit of a query, really. I'm a bit of a novice to all this, but the recent raise in annuity rates, which I've noticed, does that impact on our ability, beneficially, our ability to pay our pensions out, or does it impact on them in any way?
It doesn't impact them because you don't go and buy annuities. It impacts the private sector, but not you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think the consensus of opinion is we should be steady as we go currently, and that we will obviously keep this under review and keep a very close watch on it. As the salient points, there's no recommendations for that agenda item, so we're going to move on to agenda item 6, which is the review of the investment performance, pages 15 to 42. And I'm going to ask Anton to introduce this item and speak to it, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will pick out a few bits and pieces as normal and then take any questions. One thing that I would like to just mention, which is it's not particularly pertinent to the report as such, but there's no better time to raise it in the meeting, is that the UK equity portfolio that we're invested in, there is currently a discussion happening at Brunel, instigated by one of the other investor funds in that, to change the benchmark of that portfolio from the FTSE All Share, excluding investment companies, to the FTSE 250. That would mean it would be a smaller cap benchmark. Looking back over history, that doesn't produce a particularly different risk return profile per se. What it means would be that there would be slightly less liquidity in that fund, but I don't think to an extent that would worry us. But the main difference is by changing the benchmark to remove the FTSE 100 effectively from the benchmark, changes the sector breakdown of that portfolio considerably. So it would remove a considerable amount of weighting to banks, mining, and oil and gas. I don't think it's something we should necessarily oppose. We always have the choice as part of our investment strategy review next year to just come out of that portfolio if we don't like what it becomes. But seeing as the discussion is sort of ongoing, I just thought I'd sort of raise it and give you a chance to ask questions and, if desired, object. Whilst the debate is sort of live, rather than pointing it out in arrears when it's a decision that's already made.
Okay, thank you for that, Anton. Peter.
I'm presuming that the effects of changing the benchmark is to effectively change it against the from the best achievable rate end of, or versus something which more closely balances the funds invested. Is that fair?
So the effect of changing the fund managers, when given a benchmark, tend to be aware of it and manage to it. That's not universally true. There are some fund managers that are broadly benchmark agnostic. But so if you give them a benchmark that includes the FTSE 100, they will risk manage against that benchmark by holding certain amounts in most of the sectors prevalent within that benchmark. So if you change the benchmark, you do change the nature of what they hold. By changing excluding the 100 largest stocks and then having a benchmark that's basically the next 250 stocks, you are making it probably more exposed directly to the UK economy as opposed to the general world economy, because a lot of those very large stocks, particularly the mining and oil and gas ones, are global stocks that have no impact really on the UK economy whatsoever. So there's arguments around that. There's arguments around the specific sectoral makeup. But if you look back over sort of the last 10 years, 20 years in terms of performance, there's not anything to suggest that it's systematically particularly different. So the overall impact on us in terms of performance is relatively muted. And then there's those other factors which I am broadly, from an investment point of view, I think we can be indifferent to. From other perspectives, you may be pro or against them for whatever reasons. As I say, I raise it because it can be raised now. I raise it with the advice that I don't think it's something we need to be particularly concerned by. I don't think we should necessarily object to it. And as I said, yeah, we have got a full review of our investments next year. And, you know, if we, you know, part of that discussion would have been, will we continue to invest in a UK only pot? And the fact that the UK only pot is going to be, or could be slightly different if this is approved, then, yeah, that's a debate to be had at that time. I know it's a technical matter, but from a transparency and disclosure, yeah, it does affect our investments. I thought I should raise it.
But I think it's not. I'll bring the others in just a moment. I think it's not unreasonable that we are made aware of it, and B, are looking at this as we move forward to making that decision next year when we have our review as to whether or not we wish to continue with a UK only portfolio. John, followed by Herbie, please. John.
Sorry. It's just when we talk about benchmarking and that sort, but when interest rates and inflation are higher, the value of our currency in its purchasing power is affected. So therefore, the purchasing power of a person's pension is affected. Do we pay any credence when we set our kind of benchmark to the power of the purchasing power of an individual's pension, so that we can look at protecting his pension in real terms, if you like, rather than just a market figure?
So the pensions in the scheme are defined benefit, which means that the benefits are agreed up front. You get so much for each year of service relative to a salary. And those are, under the scheme rules, uprated in line with September inflation each April. So similar to the state pension, but not the triple lot. Just so September CPI will come in at, say, 6.5%, I think is what it's forecast. And so pensions will go up by 6.5% next April. They went up by 10.1% this April. So in that sense, the purchasing power of pensions is broadly maintained through time. So our investment returns don't directly impact the pensions received. What they impact is how much the employers, Somerset Council, schools, police, etc., pay into the scheme. And yeah, what the vast majority of the return from a UK equity portfolio comes from the fact that it's UK equities. The benchmark provides nuance to that rather than a massive change, and that's why I made the comments that actually, if you look at the last 10 years, the difference between the two benchmarks being considered, or the one that's currently in place and the one that's being considered, actually over that period is de minimis. Actually, the one being proposed is slightly higher, but to say, if you pick different 10-year periods, you get different results, but I don't think they'd be systematically different. Yeah, no, that's.
Habib, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I ask my question, I think Mike has just sent a message, Mike Houston, to say that his car is broken down and he's on his way. Yeah, so just put that on the apologies. Yeah. But
We had to pick that.
Yeah, my question is actually on the change of benchmarks. Has any other authorities started that work? Is there any lessons to be learned? And that is my question.
So the historical performance of the benchmarks is broadly available. I've got a Bloomberg terminal. I could investigate both of them back to their inception in the mid-80s. So, and Bloomberg is, Brunel is doing that analysis as part of the discussion. So how this works within Brunel is we have something called the CAD policy, which stands for Creation, Amendment, or Deletion of portfolios. So anytime we wish a new portfolio, or one of the clients wants a new portfolio or to amend a current one, they kick off a process. And one of the other fund clients in that particular fund has kicked off that process. And so at the moment, they've kicked off that process and said, we'd prefer this. And at the moment, we're discussing technical details and past performance, and so to ascertain the impacts of that, likely impacts, because obviously I can't predict the future. And then at some point there will be a vote of the clients, and it will be a vote of all 10 clients, not just those invested in this portfolio. Although typically those that are not invested would bow to those that are. But we have to bear in mind that anyone who's not invested may choose to be in the future and therefore has some level of buy-in. So it is a documented and process that we're working our way through. And as I say, part of that process now very much is us, those funds that are invested, particularly those that were not the fund that kicked it off, are asking Brunel lots of technical questions about historical performance, about the technical makeup of the two benchmarks, etc., so that we can, when we get to the point of making a decision, we can make an informed decision. And as I say, and each of the officers will relay that and deal with their own committees and decision-making processes as part of that. But as I say, from what we've already been provided by Brunel, I don't think it, in a risk-return context, I don't think it makes much difference. In a sector makeup, and I believe the fund that has raised this is keener to reduce the oil and gas exposure of that fund, and that's partly intentional as part of their reason for asking for it. So that's that is one thing, and so but we're working through the process. We're having a discussion about it now as part of that process. I'm not sure does that sort of answer your question?
You're saying, Anton, you have confidence in what's happened.
Yeah.
This is obviously a technical area, but just for the record, I'd say that I'd noted that Caroline has told us a number of times we're off the benchmark because we're not invested in petrochemical industry. So any move to a benchmark that tries to acknowledge that in some way was welcome to me. But how much that will show in reality, I don't know. But I thought it was a sensible move.
I will then move on within the report, and I will specifically just quickly talk to, as I usually do, the whole fund section, which is the combined fund, section 14 on page 36. So the returns for the quarter, a positive return of 1.8%. I mean, what we're seeing very much in the markets at the moment is limited movement in any one direction. You know, since the end of the quarter, July was quite a positive month. August was not a positive month. The net effect of the two was nothing in particular. And that's very much the theme of markets at the moment. Fixed income has lost a lot of money in the last 18 months. You look at the individual bond portfolios, there's sort of the gilt portfolios, I think 30% down in the last year. That's a direct consequence of the Bank of England raising interest rates. We should be reaching the sort of end of that now, as people generally think that we're coming towards the end of the interest rate rising cycle by the Bank of England. That's not to say we're at the end, but we're getting close to the end, and markets always look past, looking at next year rather than sort of the fact that we might get a rise next week, we might get another rise this year, maybe. Because we are getting towards the end of that cycle, we've been hugely underweight our fixed income holdings for the last 18 months because they've badly underperformed. That's been hugely beneficial to our overall performance. I will look at towards the end of this year to sort of reduce that overweight exposure, sort of normalize it to, as I think we're broadly at the end of that cycle. And if we are, then the fact that those fixed income elements are producing a yield of sort of 5.5% now, as opposed to 1.5%, makes the returns going forward more attractive. Did I want to just point out anything? I mean, I suppose the other thing to point out is we continue to be in item 14.6 on page 38. We continue to be behind the actuarial requirement for this 3 years. It feels like we might well track that now for the remaining 18 months. It disappoints me greatly that we're already halfway through this actuarial cycle. Feels like I only finished it yesterday. So I'm not convinced we will make up what we've already lost, but I'm not convinced we'll lose a great deal more either. But as I say, well, that's something just to keep an eye on. And obviously that has then impacted the overall update on the estimated funding level in 14.1. Happy to take questions on that or any other part of the report.
Okay, just from the chair, I take it from our conversations that we are sufficiently fleet of foot to be able to make adjustments in that fund to take advantage if the prices become more beneficial to us.
So, as per the scheme of delegation, the decision to adjust funds is an officer-led one.
It's quite.
So we wouldn't tend to be aggressive or fleet of foot. So we're not looking for sort of in out this month, next month. But what we're looking for is broad turning points in wider cycles. And that's why I feel that, yeah, we've got to a point of being very underweight our fixed income. And so that now feels like the time to start addressing that.
That makes sense. Okay, Michael.
Can I just ask is there, because we've got 9 other councils looking at figures like this graph. Is there one that produces a comparison by any chance of how we're doing compared to other councils? I daren't sort of raise that almost, but it might be interesting, I suppose, to see if everyone else is in the same boat.
In terms of us being broadly 91% funded, is the question. Yeah. I'm not sure how many councils put a quarterly update in the public domain. But obviously the triennial valuations do go into the public domain. I would say we are broadly average to bottom side of average. So sort of somewhere between middle and sort of quarter of the way down. The problem is that the 4 actuarial firms that service the LGPS have sufficiently different methods to make comparisons very dangerous. I can remember a meeting of my equivalents before Brunel was created, and we meet regularly via that method. We used to get together every 6 months, and after one valuation, we were sat down around the table and we tried to make sense of the differences that we could see between our 8 results. And we just ended up getting into a complete muddle. So it is possible to do that comparison, but anything but taking it as a broad brush is quite dangerous. And the other thing is it does tend to reflect weird consequences of history. So we went through a period where we had very good relative returns to other LGPSs in the 80s and 90s, which meant that we could put in less contributions, which meant that we were putting in less when we went through the GFC, which meant that as we came out the other side of the GFC, we were worse funded than everyone else, bizarrely, or than the average. And so and then we've been playing catch up, or never quite catching up, most of the others for the last 10 years. And so it's that historical context which is really hard to tease out and has implications for where each of us are now, as well as the fact that the 4 actuaries do it in a different way. And if you start comparing you can't quite compare like for like. I know that's a really long-winded answer. I know it's not necessarily helpful, but as far as I can, that's how I see the position.
Okay, so it basically sounds like an art, not a science. And okay, I take that on board, yeah, and it's not as easy as it might seem.
And we are sufficient, my understanding is we are sufficiently close to the middle of the pack that we shouldn't be particularly concerned by it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and am I correct in thinking that we are still slightly above 91% of funding? Yes.
I suppose the other thing I should point out is that the government's actuaries department also do a reworking of all the actuaries assessments on a say standardised basis set of assumptions and rework the figures. And that produces a pure, in theory, a pure ranking. But again, it misses out all kinds of context. So under the first draft of it, GAD came to us and said, we think you're not putting in enough. And we said, well, that's because you've only looked at this year's contributions, but hard baked into the 2 years of our contribution increases that you've ignored. And then you've extrapolated that over 30 years. So again, there is a direct comparison out there, but again, it still has flaws and lacks context. And, you know, it's a complicated world.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul.
Thanks. I mean, I appreciate everything you said there, Anton. And as a finance director, I'm always sensitive to comparisons and automatically defensive and resistant to those comparisons because I understand the issues. But the one area where I'm genuinely curious, and I think it's quite important, is that shortfall against the position in the actuarial cycle. Because I think the things that with the review, they were pretty common across the country, life expectancy, performance, all of that. And I think the shortfall at the moment, it's quite significant. And as you say, somewhat disappointing. I'd be really interested to know how our performance in that period pans out compared to others against that actuarial gap. And I don't know if that's deliverable, but that feels something that's material and relevant to me.
So the two things that affect that 91% in the round compared to others, because inflation is inflation and inflation impacts us all in pretty much the same way. So largely speaking, the things that affect it is our investment performance, which I had a quick look at our investment performance against other Brunel funds, just picked a couple and had a quick look. It's not over 10 years, which is the sort of timescales I think are more important in this context. It's fine. We're sort of in the. Again, I'd be surprised if we weren't broadly in the pack. And then you've got the way actuaries work, and there's two things on that. So the different actuarial firms definitely have different methods of coming to their discount rate, their assumed future performance, which hugely affects the funding level. The other thing is obviously the actuaries then set the contribution rates of employers. So, and you get odd effects. So if you're well funded and then you get good investment performance, you become more well funded, and the person that was underfunded doesn't benefit by as much. If you're putting in high contributions, especially in a falling investment market, you make huge strides forward compared to the one that's putting in low contributions. So, and obviously the contributions you're putting in are relative to history, but also relative to what you can afford, because there's usually a conversation with actuaries along the lines of they do the numbers and then they come up with an answer, and if the answer won't work somewhere along the line, the answer has to be changed, either by reworking the numbers. And some actuaries create their calculations with a discount rate that is sufficiently kind to come up with contribution rates that are affordable, and other actuaries do the numbers and then say, oh, that's not going to work, so we're going to add a short-term adjustment for a reason that we'll make up that makes them palatable. So there's all kinds of shit, and this is why I say we sat in a room and just got really confused when we started comparing 8 or 9 funds actuarial results in terms of contributions and funding rates. It's a minefield. It really is. And it's not, as I say, I think it's one of those things that if you get enough detail, you could work out why we've gone from 91 to whatever we go to, or 95 as it was at the last valuation, to whatever we end up at the next. And I could get Wiltshire's and they might go whatever they go for, and we'd look at their investment report, look at their original work, look at their contribution rates. I think I could work out in hindsight why, but that's not necessarily what you're talking about. And one of the things I'll mention later on is we're actually going to go out to tender for actuary. And if we change actuary, we might get a very different result at the next valuation because we got different actuary doing it on a different basis.
And the next valuation is next year, is that right?
No, we've got 18 months. Don't bring it forward for me. We've got 18 months.
Okay,
It'll be March 25.
March 25, thank you. Okay, any other questions from anyone on this? No? Okay. Well, nobody online. Okay. So I think we've covered the questions that have been asked, and we know what we are looking for in terms of improvement on those numbers and where we might seek that. So, okay, so again, there are no recommendations for that item, so we're going to move straight to agenda item 7, which is the review of the administration performance, pages 43 to 48. And Rachel, line?
So it's
Sorry.
Thompson today.
My apologies.
Rachel is not with us today because unfortunately it's also the Devon County Council Pension Fund Committee today, and she can't be in two places at once. So
No.
I'm sure Xander will be a more than adequate
My apologies, Sandra.
placement.
Not a problem.
So
Thank you.
when you're ready.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we can, yeah.
Okay, ideal. So just a couple of items that we would like to draw attention to within the report. So I think if we start with the specifics of the performance on page 45 of the report, Appendix 1, we can note that the performance from Q1 up until June 23 is 91%, in line with the disclosure regulation targets, which we'd like to highlight the 93% for high priority work, which includes retirements and death cases, which is very good. It's kind of where we want to be. In terms of that compared to the last quarter, people may notice that there's been a slight decrease, -1%, I think, in terms of the overall total. I think it's gone down from 92 to 91%, but we still note there's been an improvement in high priority work, which is sort of where we put a lot of our focus, obviously. In Appendix 3, we'd also just like to note, what's that on page 48, I believe, that there is still a continuing increase in demand rolling over the 12-month period, which we sort of constantly monitor, obviously, to ensure that the resource that we have is correct. So sort of matching outputs with inputs and so forth. During the period of the report, we've also received 15 compliments, which is all very good and welcome, which can be viewed on page 44, I believe. Again, on page 44, there may be items of interest there for people to have a look at in terms of employer changes. I won't sort of run through them all. It's available on those pages. If people want to have a look at those and ask questions, feel free to. I will have a just focus on section 5, the McLeod and recruitment sections, again on page 44 of the report, just to highlight some issues of interest there. In terms of the McLeod remedy, which is coming into law, as they say, on the 1st of October. We have a sort of technical and training officer on the team who's leading the project and working very closely with GLUC in terms of the statutory guidance. They're forming a working group on that because although the legislation is laid, there are intricacies within those legislations that require certain guidance as to how we all approach the legislation and ensure a sort of common approach across the LGPS to ensure that one fund is doing it exactly the same way that another fund would be doing it and that sort of thing. So we are invested in that process. We're therefore confident that we'll be able to put the correct sort of solution in place when the time arrives. And we're also sort of working obviously with our software solution to that as well with regards to amended sort of benefit statements and things like that to get information out to members. So it's all kind of coming to fruition. And also just we want to note there, we've, as a result of recent sort of recruitment exercises, we're now pleased to report that we're fully resourced and have all our new recruits undergoing their sort of training processes at the moment. And those are the main sort of bits that I wanted to discuss. So if anyone has any questions.
Okay, members, questions? Seeing any questions, I think we're all pleased that we are now fully resourced. That had been an issue in previous quarters, but I'm pleased that we're now fully resourced, and that they will obviously, at the completion of their training, will be able to take a full and active part, and we hope to see improvements continuing over the next couple of quarters. Any other questions? No, I'm not seeing any questions. Any other comments from anybody? Peter?
I'd just like to comment that I'm pleased to see the administration is reflecting the priorities that we expressed around 18 months ago now, and that just shows good management. So thank you.
We're generally happy with that as we go. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 8, Thank you, Alexander. Item 8 is the business plan update, which is pages 49 to 90 of our document pack. And I'm going to invite Anton to introduce this. Anton.
Thank you, Chair. So the usual business plan update. I will quickly just mention sort of things that are likely to come to the committee in due course, but aren't yet. One's the review of the comms strategy is noted there, but also I believe that Peninsula Pensions are working on the administration strategy. So that will come first because there are various elements of the administration strategy that then may have knock-on impacts for the comms strategy. I'm not quite sure what timetable Peninsula are working to on the administration strategy, but I will make sure that that is on the work plan as and when necessary. So that's the only thing I had to say in terms of items that are on the work plan or will be. And as ever, I'm happy to take committee sort of views on anything they'd like added to the work plan.
Okay, members.
I shall plough on then.
Thank you.
In terms of government legislation, etc., you've just heard from Xander that the McLeod regulations were laid before Parliament sort of earlier, was it early this week or last week? Yeah, so that is now a piece of work that's been sort of working its way through the system for some time. The major thing that's happened since our last meeting is briefly covered in section 4.2, but I suspect we are then going to expand on it somewhat. So the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in his Mansion House speech on the 10th of July, launched a number of pensions-related consultations. I think it was 9 across various departments. So a complete bombardment of pensions consultation work. Of specific relevance to the LGPS is the LGPS Next Steps on Investments consultation, which I appended as Appendix C. Apologise for the slightly poor layout of that, but that was the only way I could get it off of the government website. I think, just bear with me, what I will do is, so what has been happening is within Brunel, we've been talking about Brunel's response as a company. Obviously they are independent of us, but obviously we are interested in making sure that their views reflect collectively the 10 shareholders' views. We've been working through that process. I don't know whether we will actually get to a point where we have a agreed Brunel document, although I'm sure they will submit something. I have offline provided you with the current draft of theirs because I think it makes a good start on any submission we might choose to make. It's a starting point for a discussion. Does committee want me to give you an overview of the consultation before we start talking about replies? Righto.
Yes, please.
So the consultation is broken down into sort of various chapters. So if I can find something that gets in front of me, the list of chapters. I'm trying to work my way through the
57.
Yeah, I've got a feeling at the end of the consultation there's a nice summary that I can look at to remind me of each of the bits. Yeah, so the first chapter is around asset pooling. So how we work with Brunel. There are a number of questions here. Now, the first thing is that government consultations are great because the first thing they state is that they believe that pools should be of a size of at least 50 billion. And then they ask questions, but none of the questions is actually, do you agree with this assertion? So by definition, they're saying we don't really want feedback on that. We're just stating it as a fact that this is true. And now there's a couple of things on that. In response to questions at a conference last week, Teresa Clay, who is the lead civil servant for the LGPS, I don't know her technical title, but that will do for these purposes, said that the 50 billion was actually an ambition by 2030 rather than something they wish to see now. So if that is true, then Brunel at sort of 38, 36 at the moment has a reasonable chance through general investment returns. You'd usually, over a sort of 7-8 year period, if you look back, we tend to make 6-7% return annually on average. We should get there or thereabouts. And therefore, if that is true, then actually that part is of less concern than if we, but the general gist of how we drafted that for Brunel is we'd like to see your evidence that as to why you've chosen 50 billion above the previous target of 25 billion or what might be the next target of 75 billion, because one, if you're going to, if you genuinely want to get to 100 billion or something, just say so and let's have the debate about that rather than these steps along the way. But also be very cautious of how you intend us to get there, because if that means pool mergers, then we're back in governance hell, which within a Brunel context, we've spent 5 years trying to get right, and we think we've just about got there. We are likely to incur significant transition costs, like we have the first time, and we haven't repaid those transition costs yet in a Somerset context. And it'd be nice to pay off that mortgage before we create a new one. So that's the general thrust of, look, please be evidence-based, share your evidence with us, and let's have a proper debate rather than just bung a number at us. But as I say, if it's a broad ambition by 2050, well, we'll have 2 different governments by then, 2030, sorry. We'll have had 3 different actuarial cycles. We'll have had investment performance. There'll be lots of other things that will have happened in the world. I'd go back to sleep personally if it's so. That's, and then there's, in terms of the, I'll just finish up the technical questions around asset pooling. There's then a question of the government wishes to set a deadline of March 2025 for all listed assets. So that's listed equities, listed bonds, to be with your pool company. Somerset achieved that 2.5 years ago, so we're not really worried about that target. And then they're talking about whether they should encourage pools to collaborate and, where sensible, use each other's solutions. In a broad context, we're happy to explore that. So rather than Brunel coming up with its own portfolio, in certain circumstances, they might go, well, that other pool has got a really good portfolio in this space. So rather than create our own, we will advise our clients to utilize that. And again, sort of encouraging that level of collaboration. I'm not sure how well it'll work, but I don't have an issue with it. I'm happy to stop for questions around that section.
Right, we'll start with that section. Paul, please.
Thanks, Anton. I mean, in some ways, that whole question around the 50 billion is mildly amusing but irritating. But there's a really serious point here, isn't there?
And it
that-
was really annoying that they didn't put that context in the consultation document. We had to hear it third hand, 3 weeks after the consultation had opened.
Yeah, which makes an utter mockery of the consultation. It is so significant, particularly when you look at the fund that we've got with the current valuation. That 50 billion is quite a significant figure. If we're then talking 2030, I'm not quite as confident as you that we'll get there. Obviously, the inflationary environment will massively help that. But if the government had a rationale, and I am putting if there very deliberately, if they had a rationale for the 50 billion, then rationally they would up that level by 2030 to reflect the environment that we're operating in. As you say, this generates risk, it generates cost, it generates uncertainty. There's a lot of planning involved here. I think there's a bit of lobbying required. My feel is it would make sense, and I think I'm trying to politely ask if you could draft a outline letter for us to send to the relevant ministers to lobby in this area, because lobbying in the pension area has worked, but it has taken a long while to address issues. And this is one that I think does warrant some action and intervention, rather than us just sitting back and in a couple of years finding we've got all the upheaval, all the cost, and going through it all over again. I just don't want to sit here and let it happen without doing anything. It feels really unsatisfactory.
I would prefer that we put in the consultation first, because that is, but not limit ourselves to the questions there. State that we want it to be evidence-based.
Yes.
Yeah, show us the evidence and then we'll consider it. But also clearly state, as the Brunel current draft does, that done ham-fistedly, it's not going to achieve anything, because we're just going to put ourselves back by incurring more costs, etc., etc. There's various rumours around this. There's long been a rumour that there are people in Treasury, and by people, I think we would assign this as civil servants rather than politicians, who seriously believe that the best answer is one fund run by Treasury, not by DLUC. But they're either not powerful enough, or the politicians are too wary of the fallout to force that upon us in one go. My general impression is that they have some evidence, but it's from one source, and they've taken that evidence and gone, oh, this is a good idea. And they also compare us to the Canadian and Australian super funds. But those were created in a different environment. They do get different, bigger can get you some cost savings. But at the size we are within Brunel, we've already got the vast majority of those. And as you get bigger, there can be diseconomies of scale as well as economies of scale. So, which they're ignoring. It's a terribly complicated business. My preference would be we'll respond to the consultation, and then we'll have a conversation if we want to follow that up with more work, perhaps at the next meeting, depending on what comes out of this. I sort of feel that there might be sufficient pushback on the majority of this consultation that it finds the long grass for a while. Although rumour has it that Rachel Reeves and the Labour cabinet are broadly supportive of most of these themes. No, I didn't say I said I think this will find the long grass purely because of where we are in the election cycle, and where I know that government put out consultations and then completely ignore them and do what they first said in the first place. I've seen that for 20 years. I don't see any likelihood of that changing.
I think I prefer to think of Anton as a realist rather than a cynic. But I think that's something to do with 20 years of this. Okay, I'm not at all convinced that going to a fund of 50 billion as a starting point makes any sense at all. I'm not sure about the rationality of that. And I think we need to make some comments as a committee, and maybe we'll come on to those in a moment. But I think it's really, really important that we understand what potentially happening. I can't see the difference between 38 billion and 50 billion over that period is, you know, there are likely to be far more costs involved for us than there are benefits. It would be my view on it. I'm happy to take other views. I don't have a.
And as I say,
view.
the Brunel draft as is, that I would prefer to just copy and paste in large portions, is very clear. Please be evidence-based as to what number and why that number. And here are all the reasons why you should be very cautious about making any change at all.
I personally, I would go along with that, but I'm open now to members of the committee. Peter?
Well, I think we're probably all going to be in reasonably heated agreement on this. My first reaction on looking at this section was that there seemed to be no consideration whatsoever of the frictions of transition and the costs involved in transition, because the nearer you are to that to the floor number, the smaller the business case for going over it, and the larger the likely frictions. So I think it seems odd and not necessarily thought through. At the end of the day, we have a duty to our duty to our pensioners, or to the people supported by the fund. And as such, would we be acting in that direction if we supported this proposal? I don't think we would be. The other thing which I think Brunel highlighted, which is a real consideration here, is that you may actually already have pooling of risk by working together rather than necessarily being a single fund. So they were pointing out that, you know, co-managed is not much more expensive than merger, and that is actually what we're investing in as well, because we are investing in funds which are themselves consolidated collections of money being managed together rather than individual pots that are that large. So it just seems a bit odd. I get the thrust of the intent. What worries me is that it's been expressed by perhaps, and I'm speculating, civil servants wanting fewer stakeholders to talk to. That just feels like that. It has that feel about it. It's a little bit like the giant unitary argument. There's a giant unitary.
Shall I move on to the next chapter? So the next chapter is, and it gets no less controversial, to be honest, is investments and levelling up. So the government are proposing to insist that LGPS funds allocate 5% of their investments to things that contribute to levelling up. So the first thing is please define properly what you mean by levelling up and what would be included. Now, some of this may well be, we may find that if we got a proper definition and then compared it to what we invest in, we may find we're already at 3% or something. So it may not be that high. But the general thrust, and again, this is actually LGPS wide, because I've seen, a draft of Hyman's as one of the actuarial firms' response to this that they're going to put in. It's across pretty much all the funds. Brunel, everyone I've heard of have said, hold on, we have a fiduciary duty to provide returns to our members. It is the members' money. We should not be told by government what to invest in.
Yeah.
And that doesn't just pertain to a levelling up, it pertains to everything. You should not tell us what to invest in, go away. It's written out much better than that, more fluidly, but that's the thrust of it. And that's probably where I'd like to be. I'd just pick out another element of this that actually pervades through the consultation, which is questions 9 and 10 in this area. Do you agree with the proposed requirements for the levelling up plan to be published by fund? So we would have to publish how we're going to make our 5%. And do you agree with the proposed reporting requirements? Across all of this, there are additional reporting burdens. Before you later is the 265-page annual report. I would argue the length of that document does not really encourage engagement with it. They are proposing to increase it substantially. And as the Brunel response points out, we don't actually have spare resources to increase our disclosure. So how are you going to provide us with additional resources at officer level to deal with this endless creep of disclosure? So but as I say, the main thrust is we shouldn't have to invest in anything you tell us to.
I think the point about our fiduciary duty is the most salient point, and I'm hoping that we will be in agreement today that we will respond in an appropriate manner. I'm going to go to Paul and then Peter and then others. Paul.
The fiduciary duty element was my first mature reaction. My second reaction was that this really did just smack of an idea that was floated around a dinner table one evening and somehow has got in the consultation. It gave me a really jaded view of the consultation. And the final thought was this just felt like the route into a 5% levy on pension funds to fund HS2. And I wouldn't vote for that.
No, it's for me, this is the government going, oh, we can use £100 billion worth of someone else's money. That isn't money we have to raise to solve our problems.
It doesn't go.
I don't think you should give anyone ideas they might not otherwise have had. So the responsibility of the assets is ours. It's not theirs, and I really don't like the idea of using a pension fund to achieve a political aim. Not only can political aims change from administration to administration, and these are 60, 70-year involvement with a scheme for many people, first as members and then as beneficiaries. I think there is a colossal moral gap. Why would people who are hard up in southeast Somerset be wanting to invest, wanting their pension funds spent well out of area to the benefit of other parts of the population when they are really feeling the pinch? Very, very difficult to see that could be a stable situation politically if it was. It would become another political football. I'm totally unconvinced that the returns available through any political direction of travel will be as good as you can get with an unfettered capability to use the markets as they are. Logically, the markets would fund it if it was going to be market funded. So it's clearly a direction to reduce the returns. And I think that's it on levelling up. But I have a similar theme in the next section.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I have to say that I'm very unhappy about the idea of allowing politicians to dictate how we invest the money. The last time I looked, most of the politicians were not active fund managers.
I suppose one of the other things I'll just point out for pure cynicism, if you'd like some, is that the only other funded scheme in the public realm that I'm aware of is the MP's scheme, but I don't believe they've included this in that legislation.
Why am I not surprised? Michael.
In some ways, I'm sort of on board with the idea that we could invest in, for instance, there's a good one here, Nottinghamshire Pension Fund have invested in a community energy project. Now, the only problem, these things are presumably necessary and we do need to do things like that as a council, but is the pension fund the right vehicle for doing that? And that's my question. It's not whether we need to do things like that, we do, but whether the pension fund should be the vehicle for that or the council. Now, councils have already been investing in commercial property to make their balance sheets balance. Now, I don't see why the councils can't invest in something like that and leave the pension fund alone, because I think there might be more problems than it's worth, and some of these investments may not be ideal suited for pension funds. That's the government hadn't really considered that, I don't think. So on that basis, I'd say probably not a great idea.
And with this, yeah, I've always cautioned this committee against investing in Somerset because I think there is a huge conflict of interest there. Now, give money to a fund manager. If they happen of their own volition, without our direction, to go, look, there's a great thing to invest in Somerset, then wonderful. They've appraised it, they found that its risk return profile is what we should be, meets their criteria, great. But that's very different from us forcing them to do something. And it's the same in this area. You know, it's almost I see it as almost the opposite. And to misquote a film, if you build it, they will come. If the government creates the right environment for entrepreneurship, then that will generate investment opportunities that our professional fund managers will appraise and want to invest in, as opposed to the opposite, which is saying we're not going to increase the number of good investments, but we're going to direct more money to them, which seems odd.
I think they want councils to do part of the job that they aren't doing at the moment, and I think that's the mistake they're making. They're thinking there's all this untapped fund money, can't we use it for something? Well, it's not their money.
And obviously, from a political context, aside from the budget issues, if the Somerset Council wants to invest in, you know, schemes within Somerset, then that seems perfectly within their political, you know, scope and everything. And for them, financial returns might not be the primary concern.
Okay, any other comments or questions at this point? I think we are more or less in agreement that we are going to consider the consultations, and I think we should make a formal response. And I'm going to suggest that
keep going on
Anton
the chapters.
Comes on to that, and we look at that. But I think that's the direction of travel I'm getting from around the table.
And chapter 4 is exactly the same thing, but they're saying please invest 10% in private equity. Now this is really interesting in the context that they haven't actually said private equity in the UK here. They've just said private equity. So we could just continue to do what we're doing, but up it from 5% to 10%. So all the previous arguments are true, and I presume the committee's sort of appraisal of that is the same. I suppose the other thing I put out, both in a private equity context and a levelling up context, which is like if you did levelling up investments, they would likely be private equity. So there is some overlap there, and it's not quite clear how the government views that overlap. Private equity, what you tend to do is you make a commitment to a fund. So We've made a £60 million commitment to Brunel's Cycle 2 private equity. They then on commit that to specific legal entities. Typically, that money is drawn down over 4 years. So it takes 4 years for the 60 million to be invested. It's fully invested for about 2 years, and then it starts coming back to you. So even if all of this happens, what is actually going to happen is we're going to commit to investing 5% in Levelling Up or 10% in private equity, and then it will be a decade before we get there, which I don't think the government appreciates at all, because it is a slow burn mechanism. It's not with listed markets. You know, you go to the stock market, you say, I want to invest £100 million, and tomorrow you are invested. If you really want to buy 100 million of HSBC shares tomorrow, it can be done quite happily. No, I use it as a random example, and I went for HSBC rather than BP to be slightly less controversial. But other than that, I mean, it's, and interestingly, through another guise, I have a contact with the British Business Bank and said to them, look, if the government doesn't do this, but the British Business Bank wants contact with Brunel to genuinely work up proposals that might meet our investment criteria, happy to make that introduction. I'm happy to let the British Business Bank achieve its political aims by helping us invest. Because one of the things they do is they create bias structures. So British Business Bank put in 40% of the money, but only take 10% of the return. Well, if that's the option, then we might be interested.
There is a possibility that could work for
From us.
Fund members.
Yes.
Which is why we're here.
But unless committee members have something to add beyond the comments that were made about Levelling Up, I'll move on.
Any other comments before we move on?
Yes, I would like to know how many members of the government actually have interests in private equity organisations. It does feel very weird, this, because they're basically saying, we want you to be risky.
Yeah. I shall take that as a rhetorical question. If we now move on, I mean, chapters 5 and 6, and is there a 7? 7 are actually tidy ups of very non-controversial stuff. So chapter 5 is around a technical provision about how investment consultancy should be applied to a set of regulations within an LGPS context. We don't actually have a retained investment consultant, so it has no implications for us whatsoever. All those that do think this is perfectly sensible. Chapter 6, updating the LGPS definitions. This is just, frankly, previous wording was unclear. They're proposing to make it clearer. Yeah, fine. And then as a standard part of all consultations, they just have to make sure that there's no equalities issues around this. And I suppose you could argue that it disadvantages the old, but seeing as our members are across a full age range and spectrum, I suppose we could put in that it disadvantages all people equally, but the correct response probably is more that there are no particular equality impacts of this consultation. So those 3 areas are very compared to whereas the first 3 areas are very controversial and very interesting and worrying. These areas are just technical tidy ups.
I think those technical tidy ups can be left as they are pretty much. I don't see any great advantage in making any further comments on that. But I think, do we have sufficient time to discuss at the next committee meeting our formal response?
No, so the consultation closes in the first week of October.
Okay.
What I would like to ask is there anything in the current Brunel draft that any of the committee members disagree with us, including in ours?
No.
And is there anything specific that they would like added? I appreciate emphasis around levels of annoyance,
Yes.
but specific additional argument that they would like added, because if not, I will draft something that looks very like that response and then quickly circulate it offline for a final nod.
Okay, that I think would be the best way forward. I am perfectly happy to listen to suggestions, particularly around the level of annoyance, and any other comments you particularly wish to see made. But I think that's a very sensible way forward, but I'm happy to listen to alternative suggestions. So, members, any further comments, or should we ask Anton to circulate at an appropriate time before submission to the government?
It will look very like the
Yeah,
because
I think it will, but
I'm not keen to reinvent a perfectly good wheel.
no. Peter.
Yes, I was going to suggest effectively that what we're doing is we're starting from a decent baseline, so rather than start completely afresh, and I think it might also help the fund managers if they were effectively getting a red line version, to show the difference in emphasis that this committee has expressed today.
And obviously, one of the things that we've discussed within the Brunel family, so all the other funds, is whilst taking account of earlier comments about how much government listens to consultation, if the LGPS community as a whole, they get 90 responses that with slightly different flavours say exactly the same thing, they're slightly more likely to take note of it than if we were all coming at it with completely different directions.
You'd like to think so.
It's never worked in the past, but there's a first time for everything.
We would like to think so. So I think we're going to leave it to Anton to make the appropriate comments, and we can disagree by all means when you've read them, if you feel that you want a slightly different emphasis. But I'm confident that the emphasis that we've put on it this morning will be included in that draft. I have no doubt of that. And that will be with us. I don't want to put you on too much pressure.
No.
But it's got to be done by the end of the month, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So prior to the end of the month, we'll have that. If you could read it and respond as quickly as is practical for you, please, because we have to get this in the first couple of days. Is it the 3rd of October?
I think it is the 3rd.
Yeah. So we need to do this by the end of the month, please.
Yeah, I will try and get something out to you the end of next week.
That'd be lovely. I say if you could respond quickly.
Just picking up a couple of then minor issues on the remainder of that paper. Just to point out that the audit of the accounts is broadly finished, and that the formal sign-off of that, as members of this committee who have been here a while will know, is via the audit committee rather than this committee. I've never understood why, but that's the way it is. It's my anticipation that it will be going to audit committee on the 28th of September.
Okay, well, I'll make a point of attending that audit.
And then a couple of meetings just to sort of flag to you. We're going to have a discussion around sort of comms, an informal discussion around comms. Councillors Dunks, Coles and Hills from Frome have expressed particular keenness to have a discussion with me about that. So I'm sorting a date with them that I will then circulate to the others should you wish to turn up. It's a pre-meeting to discuss things that eventually will go into the comms strategy. So committee will get to opine on the final strategy, but it's to try and tease out a direction of travel. And similarly, I've long sort of commented that we will have an informal meeting on the risk register to spend a sort of an hour and a half going through the risk register in detail rather than the more cursory view it tends to get in committee, and I'm aiming to do that in November, and I will circulate an email shortly to try and extract a date where we can sort of be vaguely quorate for a discussion about risk registers.
I look forward to those dates because I think it's very important pieces of work that we need to do. So, and I thank Councillor Duncan and else for being prepared to do so. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 9 on our agenda, which is the Finance and Membership Statistics Update, which is pages 91 to 94 of our information pack. And I'm going to invite Anton to introduce the report, please.
So the standard report, I always sort of, in terms of the membership statistics, I always say, you know, we should concentrate on long-term trends and just, yeah, it's from information and good governance to have it in the public domain more than there's something to really get concerned with. I suppose the only thing I will point out is for the first time ever, we have more pensioners than active members. And yeah, that is a slight watershed moment. Yes. It's a trend that's been inevitable at some point for some time, but this is the quarter where we crossed the Rubicon on that one. But in the short term, that doesn't have any particular implications.
The long term is another matter entirely.
Yeah, so I mean, if and when we get to a stage where we're paying out more in pensions than we're getting in contributions, that has some implications for our investments and how we treat our investments and the liquidity we need to embed in our investments. I don't think it's, the difference between being minus 1 million as opposed to plus 1 million actually is more a number than anything. But as if the momentum picks up, then it will become more of an issue going forward. I think that's probably more for the next cycle than this cycle. If I move on then, I suppose any questions around member statistics?
Members, any questions on the membership stats? Habib?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quickie on this one. I understand that, you're able to draw your pensions flexibly. Would that have any implications on your future pensions?
So the full flexibility that is available to pensioners generally under general pension legislation does not apply fully to the LGPS. Effectively, if you want to access your pension using those flexibilities, your only option is to transfer all of your LGPS out to another scheme that allows that. If anyone, I'm not allowed to give it investment advice. If anyone came to me and said, should I do that? Other than in extreme rare personal circumstances, I would advise heavily against it. Their financial well-being is much better to leave their money in the fund. I think most people understand that, and Peninsula Pensions are not allowed to allow that transfer to take place without proof that that individual has taken proper independent financial advice. In terms then of the flexibilities within the LGPS, they're handled within the actuarial numbers. They're not a concern. We're not seeing a massive change in behaviour, really. Shall I move on to the financial part of this?
I think we can move on. No other questions? So yes, please, if you'd be kind enough to move on.
So at the last meeting, I wasn't able to provide the full year outturn against projection. Sorry, I just saw Peter, there's an email from Peter and it's just ruined my train of thought. So the projection, the full year outturn against the projection originally. So I have now provided that to this meeting. I have to say, I'm somewhat flabbergasted by how accurate it has proved to be. So in that context, I'm very happy that it's proved to be very close to what was originally forecast. There is a significant difference around investment income. That's a slightly odd area because the transition to Brunel has meant that we directly receive far less income. So where we directly held a given share in the past, and so when it paid a dividend, we physically received that. That's now held within a pooled fund. The pooled fund receives the dividend and reinvests it automatically. So we get far less income, and so it's, and as we've, no, but as we've gone through this transition, it's been quite difficult to actually predict what the future income level is. But other than that, it is what it is. I'm happy to take questions on that budget and that outturn. Bear in mind that when we do the annual report later, I will talk to the actual full year numbers. So perhaps we would restrict questions here around the difference between the actual and the budget rather than interrogation of the actual per se.
So, members, questions? Okay.
I will move on then. I would usually, as part of this paper, now be providing you with the outturn to end of June.
Yeah.
Against the 23-24 projection. The values currently in MSD are not fit for that purpose, which is unfortunate, but it is a inevitable, well, not an inevitable, an unsurprising, shall I say, consequence of the change to MSD and the resources we collectively as a council can put to that whilst also dealing with the first few months of unitary. There is a plan to sort it. I will be very annoyed if I cannot give you a 6-month outturn at the next meeting. It's not that the money isn't coming in, it's just not being coded in MSD in a way that allows us to present it to you in a meaningful way. And that is unfortunate, but we are where we are. And as I say, there is a plan.
It'll be an entirely different conversation if we don't get it at the next one.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Well, that is another report to be noted. So I'm just going to check everybody's happy that we note that. Thank you. Okay. Moving on, item 10 on our agenda, which is the review of pension fund risk register, which is pages 95 to 100. And again, Anton is going to lead us through this.
It is a quarterly paper. I have just stated that there is a plan to have a deeper dive of this in November. I have nothing particular to say other than some cleanups of outdated references that were pointed out at the last committee. Yeah. There has been no substantive change to the document since the last committee. I'm quite happy to take a question.
Members, questions on agenda item 10? Right, we note that there have been some changes and that we have further information later. I'm going to defer item 11 to the end of the meeting. So we're going to move straight to item 12, which is pages 161 to 410, which of course is our pension fund annual report. Anton.
So as indicated by the paper, so I'm just struggling to get to it in my.
Yeah, it's a big paper. You can't miss it.
Well, it's also that the previous paper was quite a big paper as well, yeah. So it takes a while to scroll through.
Yes, indeed.
So, as indicated by the paper, the annual report is a regulatory requirement for the LGPS. A significant portion of the content is also a regulatory or guidance requirement, either from CIPFA or central government. I could not include all of the policies, and I do appreciate that pads them out, but it is an excellent method of maintaining a public record of all our policies and a one-stop shop for anyone who wishes to sort of interrogate them. So in that sense, I think it does provide benefit to include them. It is a requirement of the regulations that we publish it by the 1st of December each year, which is why it's come to this committee. It's not a requirement of the regulations that you approve it, but I think it is exceedingly best practice that you approve it before I publish it. Last year, in fact, for the last few years, we have not made that 1st of December deadline because the audit of the audit has been substantially complete, but the auditors will not issue their opinion on the pension fund until they complete their audit of the administrating authority. So in this context, Somerset County Council, which they have not completed by 1st of December in prior years. And I am told with 100% confidence that they won't this year either. So we won't publish it. Well, it won't, it sort of is published by being part of these papers. So I could argue it is in the public domain in some form, but we won't formally publish it until after the deadline.
It's not formally been.
No. But it is substantively in draft form in the public domain. There appears to be no particular consequences of it not being published. I've not had angry letters from members of the public. I've not had civil servants chasing me and saying this is a disgrace. But it should be noted, and that is why it is before this committee today rather than the December meeting.
I fully accept that once published, it's unlikely to be read by anyone. However, I think the delays in audit are well understood, and some of them are extensive. And I know a number of authorities, various authorities across the country, have not had their accounts completely signed off even 2 years after, due to a variety of delays. As a point of principle, I would prefer it if this wasn't just sat in the Pensions Committee, that it was published as draft, because I think as an approach, the public sector needs to move effectively with a publication schedule as if they were.
Particularly as it is part of the papers for this committee, it is already now in the public domain. In draft form.
Albeit in draft form, but it is here. We have all, members of the public wish to interrogate that report, they are able to do it. It is published as part of this meeting. So, albeit in draft form, and I, like you, would prefer the auditors to actually complete their job.
And I must say, kudos to my colleagues in corporate accounting. I am very lucky that Somerset County Council's accounts have been signed off at least before the start of before a year cycle, which is not the case across Brunel. I think there are 2 funds that are still on arrears and still haven't been able to publish prior years' documents in full.
Paul, did you want to come back?
Yeah, I understand it's published as part of the papers, and we had a similar issue within the police authority where we were publishing papers as part of committee papers. But actually the delays are quite significant, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect members of the public to guess which committee something went to for them to find it. I think we should be publishing these within the schedule of financial documents and properly recorded.
I won't argue with that, but we are in a position where we can't publish them as finalised, but we can only publish them as draft, and I'm pleased that they are actually out in the public, even if it is as only as part of this pension committee's papers for today's meeting, but they are at least out there, and anybody inquiring can be pointed at a draft set as we have. It's the best we can do under the circumstances. I don't think it's ideal either, but I'm pleased that we have got even a draft set out there in the public domain. Peter.
Chairman, I'm presuming that notwithstanding the technicalities of sealing a particular copy as a public record that hasn't got draft on it, the actual act of publication is in effect to create hyperlinks within various websites that take you to material. surely it would be possible for us to actually have sitting where the pension report should be, a hyperlink that says draft pension report may be accessed here.
I'm hoping that that is the case.
It's not currently
If it
the case, but
isn't, but
I
if it
can
could be.
look into that.
Yeah. If it, I think it's not an unreasonable point, and I think it is something that I would welcome. I'm going to ask Council on if he will do that.
Yeah, I can look into
Yeah. Thank you.
that. Without knowing anything about the technicalities of how websites are made or anything, but I'm sure it is possible.
I'm sure I'm sure if we can publish it as part of the papers for this meeting, I'm sure we can put
Yes.
a line in saying the link to the draft
Is
accounts is here.
I'm
I'm confident that we will be able to manage that between us.
happy to, unless there's other questions around particularly joys of publishing, I'll move on to the actual content.
Oh, okay, let's go to the content then.
So it's difficult to know what to pull out for you. I habitually pull out in the report some general analysis of the accounts and the numbers. So not just what the contributions are, but how they've increased and some context around where that increase is in the report. I do not plan to go through those line by line. So I'm happy to then take questions around any element either picked out in that or in the wider morass of the document itself.
I'm just sort of looking at the pooling savings, and it mentions that we're saving 2 million, and that's offset by 1 million to Brunel for fees. Then I'm looking at the projections ahead, and they're stunningly. Well, I'm on. Sorry, I should have said page. It's 34, but it's also page 198, I think. 199. Sorry. Yes, there's two numbers going on. Basically, yeah. So there's a projection ahead of how much we're going to save in the future from 2025 to 2036. So that's 10 years, 11 years. So that's considerably more than we're saving at present. Is that based on some sort of information or just hope?
So the table on page 199 of your document is the business case that was created when Brunel was created. So when the government laid out that the joy that, thou shalt pool, they stated that they wished a 20-year business plan, which I always thought was quite amusing, both in the context of the difficulty of forecasting over 20 years and, as the earlier consultation indicates, the likelihood of the government leaving it alone such that that business plan will actually play out for 20 years. And some of the committee have heard me say this before. I don't think any of the current committee were actually members of the committee in 2016. When this business case came before the committee at that time, I stated exceedingly low confidence in it, but pointed out that the government were going to force us to do this. Here is a business case that indicates it will be beneficial to us. I am in no way convinced that it will be beneficial to us, but we have to do it. So, please sign it off. And so that's what that is. Then on the page, a few pages further on, so on page 202, no, not 202, sorry, 203, is then how we are performing against that. And Brunel's costs, both cumulatively to date and per year now going forward, are significantly higher than they were. The transition savings were, so transition costs were more expensive than forecast, but they are now finished. The in-year savings are now greater than forecast, but probably not by as much as the increase in Brunel costs. So we are now making in-year savings of £1 million a year. Assuming the veracity of these figures, I could go into weeks of detail about how these numbers are created, and that there are sort of assumptions and etc. built into them, some of which are reasonable, some of which are not. So I've been told how to produce them. I've produced them. They tell a story. I don't think they tell a particularly nice story for us. I think by 2030 we should be in the black overall, which is not a great message, but it is where we are. I can't say we're surprised. I'm surprised we're where we are. It's fair to say that our fee base was lower than most when we went in. There are other Brunel funds that are actually break even this year or next year. So we are at the tail of that because we were in a slightly better position at the start. Hey ho.
Yeah, thank you for illuminating me on this interesting subject. Wait and see what the Somerset Unitary does similarly in terms of savings, but I won't go there.
It's not my position to
opine. For another committee, Michael, and I'm sure you will raise it at the. Okay. Any questions for Anton
on other matters of the document
in that pension fund annual report? No? Okay, well, a couple of things here. The first two recommendations are that we approve the pension fund's annual report 22-23, subject to the addition of the external auditor's response. I'm going to propose that from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you. And those in favour? That's all of us. Thank you. Excellent. And the second recommendation is that should the external auditors require changes to be made to the accounts prior to the provision of their opinions, to authorise the chair to approve amendments on behalf of the committee. I would obviously do that in conjunction with Anton and others if we felt that was a significant change. John. Yeah, I was going to say.
We don't take them into account and act on them, then we're being quite irresponsible. So I'm quite happy to propose that.
And actually, on the basis that I've now read the draft of the auditor's outturn report to audit committee, I really don't think it's going to be an issue. They do read the annual report because they have to check that it is consistent with those accounts. It is not beyond the bounds of possibility that they will find the deliberate typo that I've left in there somewhere. So there may be some minor typo tidied up, which I will not bother the chair with. I will just make them and publish.
Okay, so we're in agreement with that as well, please, gentlemen. Lovely. Thank you. That's all of us. Thank you. Okay. Right, Anton, we're going to move on to agenda item 13, which is knowledge and skills. And here we have Anton's view of how good or bad we are. So, Michael. There isn't evasion. A verbal update from Anton.
Excellent. That's the simplest.
I was going to say, is that under knowledge or skills? That
means I can read my notes.
So there's good news and bad news on this. So the assessment of the responses to the questionnaire don't indicate that there is one specific topic that needs addressing. There isn't somewhere where you're universally uneducated, and that we need to rectify that forthwith. However. No, there is a general level of error that needs to be upskilled. What Barnet Waddingham have sent me an email on is that they have launched a online tutorial package across a variety of topics. I wish to investigate that with them a little bit. I believe it's free. I'd like to just kick the tires a bit, but what I would propose is that I unleash you all upon that for you in your own time to do various modules. It will then record that you have done those modules. I can show that as training time done. Yeah. Obviously, as we move into discussions about various topics, I think particularly about the investment strategy, we will have discussions about that next year for a decision on a new investment strategy for March 2025. Informal sessions that we have on that will be a mixture of training and discussion. So I would start the meeting with providing you with pertinent information about what you are about to talk about to help you understand what you're about to decide upon, or indicate, so I can then draft a document that you will eventually formally decide upon. So there, you know, specific items where I think you're about to make a decision, you need to know more before you make the decision, we will address specifically at that time. But there's a general level of sort of upskilling that I think the Barnet Waddingham website may be a convenient basis for you individually in your own time to work through. And as I say, that will then give me a nice audit report that I can put into the accounts to say, yes, you are doing additional training. We are working on our upskilling. I mean, it's one of the things that I didn't address in the consultation is currently there's a bizarre thing that the board are legally required to do training, but the committee are not. I've never understood that, seeing as the committee are the decision makers and the board's advise. We've always treated you as exactly the same. There is a suggestion within that consultation that they formalise the requirements of committee to train. We would indicate that we're fully in favour of that because we think it's important that you do train, and we are taking steps to make sure you do.
Excellent. I think I would have been really surprised if that questionnaire had not exposed us for what we are. And the reality is we're not pension fund managers. And, you know, that the fact that we have all done the Barnet Waddington questionnaire is a good thing. And I think I would like to make it mandatory that we do the next steps, and we have the training that Anton has suggested, because this is really, really important stuff for thousands of members of our pension scheme, and we should be doing the very, very best job we can. And I'm not at all surprised that we are not all fully fledged pension managers. It doesn't surprise me in the slightest, but I think it's really important that we take steps for the committee to have that level of training in exactly the same way that the pension board does. And I do not understand why it was never done in the past. So I don't understand why not.
We've always treated the two the same and tried to get the same level of competence on both. I've never understood why one is legislated for and the other is not.
I don't understand either, and I'm happy to make it happen. John?
Yeah, isn't it just a different legal status of a board to a committee?
Probably.
It is. I suppose what it really comes down to is that boards were created as part of the Hutton Review and came into being in 2015, and fresh legislation was put in place to formalise those boards. Whereas committees are committees of the council and fall under the normal committee rules of council. And so no one's got round to notice it. They've just got round to noticing the disparity effectively, and they're looking to tidy it up.
I think it's good practice, and I think we should do it. John?
Yeah, but I think we should do it voluntarily. I think we all agree we need to do it. Otherwise, we're going to get into a situation, if this committee has it, then other committees, and then we get a leak.
I will strongly urge every member of this committee to complete it at their own chosen speed, but preferably before the next meeting. Okay, when it comes out, I would strongly recommend that people.
I think there are sufficient modules available that I wouldn't necessarily insist that everyone completes everything by the next committee.
Okay, we might take slightly longer, Peter.
Chairman, I'm just thinking that one of the differences between the board and the council, council members, is the council members can reasonably expect some level of external support in addition to the training and own knowledge. Obviously, you know, we have a relationship with the fund manager, but he's also our advisor. You know, it's an interesting. Sorry.
It's an interesting.
It's an interesting mix.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that I think the idea of building training into workshops prior to preparing decisions is always going to be the safer route, and is usually the route taken by, for example, planning policy.
And when we do those offline meetings, it will be board and committee together. You know, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I don't want to do it twice. And also, I think it's healthy in the context that, seeing as the point of those is to then guide me when I actually write a formal policy, that it actually is best to include all views and to air those and have a full discussion before I start drafting it, rather than I draft something that committee have opined on and like, but then board, it's the first time they get to see it is in a formal board meeting and they go, well, actually, we hate this, yeah. Which isn't a particularly useful way forward. I shall also point out that non-councillor committee members of both the committee and the board get exactly the same access to me, documents, everything else as councillors. As far as I'm concerned, you're all the same. As wise as each other.
Excellent. Right.
I have no view as to whether we do AOB first or I think we probably do AOB first.
Okay.
It's not usually a vast array.
No, I was going to say, we're going to move to item 14, and that's any other business. Are there any items I've not been notified of anything? Anybody got any business? No. In that case, okay, what we're going to do now is move back to agenda item 11, which we're going to do in closed session. So if Steve, if we could close the session down, please. When we're ready, please tell me.